Welcome to the Windrush Caribbean Festival podcast. The journey continues. I'm Nadine Drummond, award-winning journalist, and on this episode, we talk to the director of the film IREKE, The Rise of the Maroons. The director's name is Peter MacJob, former BBC finance journalist, and the director of Buff Film Festival, Emmanuel Anyiam-Osigwe. Emmanuel, I know I've got that right. I practiced. Tune in. We talk about cultural appropriation, ownership. We talk about creative license, and we talk about the politics of Hollywood, Nollywood, and the Caribbean. It will be an eye-opener. Follow us on the socials for more. Peter, please go first.
Okay, thank you for having me. My name is Peter MacJob. I'm a journalist and a filmmaker, and I'm the writer and the director of IREKE, Rise of the Maroons.
And you're awfully quiet, Emmanuel. Please go ahead.
There. Sorry. Right. So, good afternoon. My name is Emmanuel Anyiam-Osigwe, MBE. I'm the founder of the British Urban Film Festival. I'm also the co-founder of Buff Studios, who are the co-executive producers of IREKE, Rise of the Maroons. My mentor just happens to be one of the most prolific British Caribbean filmmakers, the late, great Menelik Shabazz.
That's quite an introduction. Thank you both. So I have so many questions, right? And my first is this: what made this story? What made you want to make this story, Peter?
Yeah. So I was watching a documentary by Clive Murray, BBC presenter, called My Caribbean Adventure, and because I make documentaries for the BBC. So whenever I see anybody making documentaries, I want to check so I can, learn new best practice or have an idea. The moment I started watching Clive in the Caribbean, I started thinking about, I need to make an African adventure. I need to go to Nairobi. I need to go to Rwanda. I need to go to Nigeria, that kind of stuff. And in the course of that, he goes to this community called the Maroons, who were descendants of African slaves and who had, formed themselves into a militia and fought the British to a standstill, to the point that the British had to come to a truce. So I sat up, I'm like, oh, I didn't know that, because in my knowledge of slavery and, everything, I just felt at some point they decided to have mercy upon us and let's set us free. And growing up in Nigeria, every now and again, we would always say, but we talk about our spirituality, we talk about us working with lions, you see videos of some woman walking through a bunch of hyenas, and they say, how the hell did they colonize us and keep us in servitude for so long if we are this amazing bunch of people? So these comments will pass it. So when I heard that there was a group of Black people who fought to the point that Britain had to come to a truce, that got me interested. And as I was watching it, I saw that they had some African practices, the way they were trying to teach Clive Murray some words, which I recognize as like Yoruba words and things like that. I'm thinking, hang on a second. So of course I started reading. And then I realized, okay, these Maroons were African slaves. Where did the slaves come from? Bight of Benin, Bight of Biafra, Nigeria, that's where they came from. So straight away, I want to make a documentary immediately just about the Maroons. But I really couldn't get anybody to commission it. And it was at the time when Nollywood, the Nigerian film industry, was already thriving and trying to push the envelope, because usually the story is about love, romance, family. And I'm thinking, well, if you're going to appeal to a global audience, we need local content for a global audience. Does it get any more global than this? Everything that I've watched, Roots, 12 Years a Slave, Django Unchained, it's all from the global north. It's all from Hollywood. we've not told these stories ourselves either. So, I started realizing that this is something I would really love to do. And when I started talking to people within the film industry, like, how much would it cost me if I wanted to make this kind of film? The way they say, once you're ready, the universe will provide the opportunities for you. And everybody I've run into had one idea or the other that kept getting it closer and closer and closer. And if that this whole journey started March 2024, and here we are, all done.
That's quite quick. And what's your involvement in the film, Emmanuel?
So my involvement is quite organic in that this is our 20th year running the British Urban Film Festival, which is one of the prominent Black film festivals in the UK, showcasing stories just like Peter's. But as is with anything in life, and you're so focused and kind of got that tunnel vision, and just kind of putting out the festival year in, year out, in spite of all the obstacles in our industry. We were celebrating our 20th year right back in January. And before Peter became part of the conversation, our film became a BAFTA-winning film festival, because one of our films, which was shown at the festival last year, had won the BAFTA for Best British Short Film. And he only won that BAFTA because it was shown at the BAFTA Festival. So we were in already celebratory mode. We're kind of thinking, how do we kind of exploit this opportunity? How do we kind of elevate BAFTA to a global audience? And here we are with this BAFTA winning moment. And then 6 weeks after that, another of our short films, which premiered at the festival last year, was nominated for another BAFTA in the TV version of the BAFTAs. So it's like, this is like manna from heaven. If you could write a script about how to celebrate the 20th anniversary, this would be the perfect way to kind of create that narrative. So we're kind of on cloud 9, 10, 11, 12, whichever cloud you can think of. That's what cloud we were on. And then we get a call just after Easter from Peter, who we had known for years. He actually came to one of our productions that we produced a couple of years ago, a documentary called Absolutely Marvelous, which was our second film release. And that was a film that dealt with a British heavyweight boxer of British Nigerian heritage and his mother, who is 93% blind. So the premise behind that film was to kind of tell the story of this Black British woman who just happens to have a celebrity sports person, but can't see him box in the ring. And that story just kind of went on its own kind of journey. And Peter was with us at ringside for one of the boxers' fights. So that was the last time I heard from Peter. And then just after Easter, Peter got in touch with my wife, Claire, and told her about this film that he was making, IREKE, shot in Nigeria, the whole storyline which you just heard about, inspired by Clive Murray. And because of our track record as a film festival, he was looking for someone to kind of take it to the next level in terms of exhibition, getting eyes on it, and I guess just kind of building that visibility and credibility, because this is Peter's debut film as a filmmaker. So I guess he chose the right people to just kind of take it to the next level, because I guess within a month of that conversation, we then watched the film for the first time. And I know that Claire was blown away by it. And then when I eventually watched it, we were already kind of starting to just come up with ideas in terms of how do we get everyone's eyes on this film and this story. And it just speaks to the ethos of the festival in terms of bringing global Black communities together, and not just Black communities, but just communities in general that have historically felt underserved, unrepresented, marginalized, always on the extremes, looking in. And so we just kind of used those advantages and leveraged it with Peter's film. And so once we were officially attached as executive producers, the first thing we said to Peter was, we need to take this film to Cannes, which is the world's biggest film market, where everybody who is engaged in film goes to Cannes to kind of showcase themselves. And so that was a natural thing for us to do. I say natural, we've been to Cannes 3 times previously. The very first time was to showcase our first film, as a company.
But just to stick a pin, right? Because this is IREKE. So many films have explored slavery, but as you said, Peter, IREKE has a twist, right? And what sets IREKE apart from previous representations of enslavement on screen?
Told by us, told by us. Yes, we know the story. There's nothing new here, but it'll be nice that we're telling it. But apart from that, the part of resilience, the part of rebellion, and the part of victory, So that's the one that we like. The fact that we get to tell that story ourselves. Because constantly we complain that the global north do not represent us properly, or that, the black person dies first in the big blockbuster. The black person is going to die first. All these kind of things that we say. And we were thinking, for a growing industry like Nollywood, like the Nigerian film industry, enough of parties and weddings and celebrations. Let us start to tell our own stories. I saw Last King of Scotland. That was a story about Idi Amin, a Ugandan man put forward as a dictator. Nobody's challenging that. But there are other sides to him that I feel like a Ugandan filmmaker should tell. Sometimes when I look at the Ali Foreman fight in DR Congo, two Americans coming to DR Congo to fight. But while they were there, they had Congolese people working with them in the gym. There's a story there to be told about a young man in DR Congo aspiring to be a boxer just after watching his father work for Muhammad Ali. So as a creative, I just kept feeling like we need to do way more. It's not enough that we've seen Django and we've seen Roots and we've seen 12 Years a Slave. We are here to tell our part. And so with IREKE, our part as to how we won and how the masters were overwhelmed, right, etc., told in local language as well. And that's the difference, I'd say.
If I can just add on to that, Nadine, another reason why I was so bought in with IREKE was off the back of Sinners, which I had seen twice. And for me, in all the years that I've been doing film, is the greatest film I have ever seen. But what particularly struck me with Sinners, and if I had looked at Ryan Coogler's work prior to Sinners, is his fascination with African stories and just African culture in general. And I noticed that when I watched the first Black Panther, and he mentioned the Benin statues in that storyline. And then towards the end, he mentioned the Igbo landings, and I'm of Igbo heritage in Nigeria. So the fact that Ryan Coogler, who's not African as far as I know, was telling a story about my people in a Black film like Black Panther was inspiring to me. But also there was a bit of me thinking, why has it come to the point where Ryan Coogler is telling my story and I'm not? And then when Sinners came around, it was history repeating itself again, just talking about African culture and African themes. And I guess at that point, I just thought, as soon as IREKE landed, we just had to tell this story. It's that whole issue of ownership and making sure that African people are telling African stories on a
But is IREKE an African story?
Well, these were African slaves, Yes, it happened in the Caribbean, but they were African slaves, who were speaking their own languages as at the time that they were picked up. And that's the part that I wanted to share. But also, that's a great question, because when I look at the Caribbean and I'm thinking with the cultural influence of Jamaica as an example, with the reggae music and everything, and I'm thinking, well, where are the films? Where are the films? So what we're not trying to do is wait, because Hollywood is about to do that while we're waiting. The same way they've done Last King of Scotland, they've done everything else. So we're just thinking, well, it's our story because these slaves were our ancestors. So we start from there, and that's why I felt like it's not out of reach for me as a Yoruba person, knowing that a lot of the slaves were Yorubas and Igbos, to tell a slave story.
Okay, so there's lots to unpack here, and I'm going to do it in 3-point form. So Emmanuel had said that Ryan Coogler, who's an African American, if we go back far enough, we all share the same descendants, was telling his stories. So I don't understand why somehow a person of Caribbean descent wouldn't feel like you're telling our stories, in part because ancestral links don't equal lived experience. You're talking about enslaved Africans, many of the Maroons who were born and raised on the island. And shared bloodlines don't necessarily justify telling another community's story. So surely the same critique leveled or observation leveled at Ryan Coogler for sinners, perhaps, can be leveled at you as well, Peter, and you as well, Emmanuel.
So, I mean, for me, from my standpoint, I have no issue with Ryan Coogler doing that story. And like, I think, like Emmanuel said, it inspired him, you know. So it's the inspiration that, yes. So I would think that with IREKE, Rise of the Maroon, there's a sequel, there are series. We need that collaboration with the Caribbean. If we had the money, that should have been shot in Jamaica, you know, but it's a low budget movie where we had to shoot, where we had the strength, where we had the contact, where we could get location for free, and we didn't have to travel. But now that I've done it, I think it's time that it becomes a Caribbean storytelling in conjunction with the African, not a Hollywood storytelling. Because the risk we fall in is while we are hanging around, somebody from Hollywood jumps up and go make this film.
I understand that. But I have another question to ask, I guess, which would be point two, is that Jamaican Maroons aren't preserved Africans. They have clear Caribbean identity shaped by the rupture being stolen from Africa or sold by Africans in the Bight of Benin or the Gold Coast, or from whence they came. And they're shaped by resistance, and they're shaped by cultural evolution. So I'm wondering where this idea comes from that you claim then as African in the same way that you're African. I don't understand that.
So are you suggesting that they have a separate ancestry or something like that? Because for me, it was very simple. I'm coming from the point of ancestry. The fact that when they were picked up, they were slaves from Africa, taken on a boat to the island to work, you know, regardless of the time lapse. So with the, you know, that's my mindset. And again, like I said, how I got inspired, watching them talking in a way and doing like religious practices that I recognized back in Africa. So that's my attachment to them. When you say Akwaba, so regardless of this evolution that you have mentioned, Akwaba, you still kept that. That's an African language. So I'm thinking to myself, these are our people for sure, and this is their story. You know, I want to tell that. That's really
so. I think the challenge is the way in which, and this is both of you, and I think it's important when we're discussing global Black communities, who's African, who's African, who's African, who's not African. Are we talking about identity? Are we talking about culture? And it's using these terms interchangeably without having either a clear understanding or explaining what they mean to you. So when you say African, what is it that it means, Peter? What is an African?
I'll say shared ancestry, you know, shared ancestry, idiosyncrasies, food, culture, religious practices, shared history, things like that is what I would describe in my understanding as who an African is. Not to mention, you know, physiology, etc.
And for you, Emmanuel, you said that you felt that Ryan Coogler was telling our stories. What did you mean by our? And how? And you said that, to your knowledge, he wasn't African. What does that mean?
So, like I said, so the fact that he used the Igbo landings at such a pivotal point in the Black Panther story spoke to me on obviously multiple levels. One, the fact that the Igbo experience has never been told in the mainstream before. So obviously to someone like Ryan, that meant a whole lot. So by default, that would mean a whole lot to the Igbo people, especially with the Biafran War. And obviously, as Peter mentioned, the Bite of Biafra was a whole part of this IREKE story. And so the Africans and the Caribbeans are linked by the British Empire naturally. So there, as Peter said, there are shared ancestral issues that we all have to kind of tackle, talk about, which is what we're talking about now. And I guess right from the 17th century right up until now, there are still questions that we are asking about what happened to our peoples, why we were all displaced back then, the divide and conquer, etc., which then became all of us speaking different languages, having different ways of doing things, when in fact we were all doing the same things at one point in history. But I'm not a professor of history. I'm just a creative, and a true creative has the artistic license to tell stories as they see it, just as Ryan has, just as Clive Myrie did, just as Peter has done as a journalist. So we have that leverage. And in the absence of other things that we don't have in terms of the finances to tell grander stories, with what we have, it's only right that we get to have some sort of ownership in terms of the stories that we put out. Because historically, the likes of Hollywood have a different point of view on the Black lived experience. And I guess what we've been talking about on this podcast is about how we're trying to reclaim the narrative as opposed to reclaiming what actually happened throughout history.
Okay, you said a couple of you say lots of interesting things actually, but I'm just going to highlight a couple. So you said that you have the creative license. I think that Clive Myrie is Jamaican. I don't know if Clive Myrie has Maroon ancestry. I haven't seen that documentary, so I don't know if he has a Maroon ancestry. In Jamaica, Maroons are considered to be a separate ethnic and cultural group, because they often tend to be the least mixed, and you have different Maroon communities across the island. And you said ownership. What do you mean by ownership when you're talking about telling stories that are not directly linked to your cultural background? If we're talking about who's African and global Black communities, I don't understand that.
They are linked. There is a link.
Okay.
There is a link. I think the slave route, that's the link. That is
but
the link.
How can you claim a story and call that our stories?
Well, it's not about claiming a story. It's telling the story that is out there. It's there.
Okay.
First of all, the heroics of the Maroons, to keep that under the carpet like nothing special happened. You know, is what's the word I'm looking for? I feel like it's an indictment of sort to try not to celebrate this group of people, to leave them. I mean, I realize that there's an annual ceremony every year, you know, in Charleston, where the Maroons come together to remember what happened, like some side gig, which I feel like that should be a main event every year in the history of this island, because these are the guys that fought back. So it's not about laying claims to it. It's reporting it, it's telling it, right? But for me, there's some level of attachment, because God forbid that Hollywood tells the story of Maroons before the island or before the continent of Africa. So, but like Emmanuel mentioned, as a creative, there's license to a degree to at least highlight it. So for me, it's a recognition of the heroics. The fact that not everybody just sang Kumbaya and say, yes, master, yes, master. That people fought back. I just felt like there's no chance I can just walk away and read that like a side note and say, oh yeah, there's a group of people in Jamaica. No. And whatever comes with that, I'm happy to take that on board. You know, the same way I could have reported it as a journalist, and for people's entertainment, I decide I want to make a film about it. But I'm not saying it's my story, not at all.
No,
But
I think,
at the same time, I cannot accept the fact that, oh, you have no right to tell it. I do have a right to tell it.
yes,
There's an
I didn't
ancestral
say
link.
I didn't say
Not
there was
you. No,
a
no,
right
no,
to
not you,
tell it.
Nadine. Not you,
Okay.
Nadine, at all. No, no, no. Yes, I mean, I can understand that could come from anywhere as well.
yes,
But for me, I just feel like if I call myself a journalist and an African, and there's a story about a group of people who fought back, and won, I want to celebrate them.
yes. Yeah, definitely. And where I use the word "our" is, I guess, my frustration as a Black creative in the Western world with the fact that there's not enough of these stories being told by Black people. Coupled with the fact that, having known how the film industry works in the Caribbean, having gone to Grenada and Trinidad and Tobago last year on reconnaissance for other projects, I know that, just going back through history, the proximity of the Caribbean with America would make one think that it would be very easy for more Caribbean stories to be told. But that hasn't been the case for the last 70 years. You've had Bob Marley, Black Love, One Love recently, and then in terms of Black British or Western Caribbean stories, the last film I can think of is How Stella Got Her Groove back in 1998. That's too long a gap between Black people telling stories about ourselves. So for me, there was a frustration and an urgency. And so that whole claiming is about us as one people trying to tell the story about the Maroons. And the fact that it's come from an African lens shouldn't detract from the fact that it's, from my perspective, us trying to reclaim the narrative against the likes of Hollywood, Bollywood, or whichever other wood wants to lay claim to the stories that define who we are as people.
So this is what it feels like you're suggesting, that there's political motive in telling these sorts of stories before the global north tells them, which I understand, but that doesn't mean that there can't be contemplation of some other aspects. And one of those is, I guess, Peter, did you engage with any Jamaican Maroons from any of the Maroon communities when you were making your film?
The film was shot in Abeokuta in Nigeria, very low budget movie. But I have a friend in Manchester who's an actress and a descendant of the Maroons. So we had a little chat regarding what I was trying to make. And before we finished it, we had a couple of clip sequences, which I had shown her and a group of friends who also said they had Maroon backgrounds, just to see what they think about it, just feel their pulse. And we got actually got a standing ovation. And I actually recorded their testimonies, them saying they love the opportunity to have these kind of stories out there. I guess the conversation didn't extend to the point of, what, should you be telling it or should someone else be telling it? It didn't get that far. But the idea that story was told in a way where it's respectful of the Maroons and celebrates their ingenuity, the spirituality, almost like just exaggerating how incredible they were, to the point that people thought they were ghosts, blah, blah. So they loved that bit. And the fact that they actually had such ancestry directly, because somebody said my great-granddad is a Maroon, one of them. So that gave me some peace of mind going forward. And this was Black History Month, actually. This was October. So we had a little break in the production of IREKE, but we had enough clips to show. And yeah, so to answer your question, there was a bit of that. But in terms of, maybe consultancy, etc., incredibly low budget movie that didn't really allow for much. But in my position as a journalist, extensive reading, extensive research, just to make sure that the storytelling was accurate enough.
So just so we're clear, I'm not suggesting that you didn't have a right to make the film, nor am I suggesting or inferring that it's not a story that you shouldn't tell, or anybody shouldn't tell or promote, as somebody who is an African, a direct descendant from Africa. That's not what my line of inquiry is. My personal feeling is that when we tell stories that are not, you're right, we do have a direct link to the story. When you tell stories that are not obviously yours, that there needs to be care taken, more care. And the reason I raise this issue is because there are 3 films, I would say, in the last 5 or 6 years made by African directors and largely African producers about the Caribbean, particularly Jamaican culture, which have just been pretty bad. One of those is Jafaican, made by Freddie Nwaka. I think I'm saying his name correctly. The other is Yardi, made by
Idris Elba.
And there's another one, I can't remember it, to be honest. But it seems like there's a pattern of African directors who've put themselves in position and places where they can make these films about Jamaican culture, largely Jamaican culture, and they make them in such a way that when Jamaicans watch them, largely, whether they're on in the Caribbean or in Britain or in America or in Canada, are largely unimpressed. And so, and I'm not suggesting that IREKE is one of these films. I'm saying there's a pattern. Mm. And within that, I wonder if enough care is being taken by directors to actually engage with the people that they're making these stories about. And this idea that we're Black, or because we're African descent, or because there's a link, that those directors actually really understand the culture and really understand the stories that they're telling. And I guess the question is, then who is the audience and who are they telling the story for? So okay. I guess the question to you, Peter, is who is your audience and who are you telling the story for?
Global audience is my audience. Global audience. For everybody who have watched Roots and just have concept of Kunta Kinte, I want them to be aware of Maroons. Now, I'm sensitive to the fact that the Jamaicans who are the, who will be like, this is our story. I'm aware and sensitive that they would want some level of accuracy, or possibly like, who did you consult while making this film? And I accept that. But for me, the calling is bigger than that. The calling is, I want the global North to be aware, but also for my fellows in the continent of Africa, the ones who look at the white messiah, like, yeah, they punished us for a long time, and then in the goodness of their heart, they let us go. No, they didn't let us go. There was a group of our people who fought back constantly. Those that jumped to their deaths off the boat because they never wanted to be slaves. Because now I'm thinking, how on earth were my ancestors just allowed themselves to be chained for years, only because they didn't let me know that there was a group of people who fought back constantly, right? So now that I know, I need my entire continent of Africa to know that. I need Nollywood, in all its success, to know these kind of stories. And I want the global North to know that. I'm hoping also that the Caribbean, who fought for us, would acknowledge the fact that it's a step with the right intentions. And if there are any sloppy stuff or oversight or blind spot, apologies. But going forward, when are we going to do that collaboration? Right? When are we going to do that? So as a business journalist, there's this concept, this bank called Afrexim Bank, constantly trying to do sessions between Africa and the Caribbean to be like, how do we collaborate? Because we export the same thing to America and we import the same thing. What do we do between each other? The creative industry is a big gap. IREKE, Rise of the Maroon, that's what we need to do. Let's do the sequel in Jamaica. Let's do this series in Jamaica. Let's have Jamaican actors and actresses. Let's have Jamaican co-production. Where's the money? Let the Jamaican government bring the money. Let us together start to address this thing so that in between each other, as cousins, we don't keep having these blind spots and these gaps. And so that's my calling. That's exactly what's calling me, to answer your question. Where are my audiences? The global community. I want everybody to be aware of this community and about this story.
I can already tell you, Nadine, that in Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, they want IREKE. I've already spoken to distributors and producers out there, and we're close to securing some streaming deals. So there's already a demand for the film because there's not much of it, but because it's a story that greatly appeals to them. And as I said earlier, having gone out to Grenada and Trinidad and Tobago, they want to connect with Africa. They want us to work closer together so that we can shoot the sequel, as Peter said, in the Caribbean. The fact that the Caribbean is close to Hollywood, there's got to be some leverage there. But my point is, we don't need Hollywood per se. We don't actually need Hollywood for anything. And the sooner that we all learn to be self-sufficient in terms of how we bring these products to the world, the better it will be for all of us, because we get to own more, to keep more, to tell stories more. And that will only make it easier for the next generation who don't have to fight the battles that we are continuing to fight in the industry.
So I understand that, and I think that's commendable, but you're conflating two issues, Emmanuel. One is political, which if you are a creator and you also want to benefit from the economic proceeds of your art or your talent, I completely understand that. But it reads like colonial erasure when you tell stories and don't engage the people with the stories that you're telling. And Grenada is not Jamaica. Trinidad and Tobago is not Jamaica. I live in Jamaica most of the year. I'm also a creative. And it's really important for these stories to be told by everybody. They're not stories are stories that you tell. If the story is good enough, you tell it. But the same standards by which we expect white filmmakers or the global filmmakers to have when they make stories about us as broader Black people, even before they get to our individual ethnicities or cultures or language or whatever it is, we have to have the same standards for ourselves. There's a wonderful story in Lagos I would love to tell. Right? But for me to tell that story, and so I'm making it from a British Caribbean lens and not engaging the people who I'm telling the story about and saying, oh, it's because if we go back far enough, we're all ancestors. It doesn't ring the same. I think that in position, you do what you can. And that I absolutely support that. In position, we do what we can. But there needs to be a continued awareness that there's still a responsibility, even if we all descend from Africa and even if we have similar melanin content, because it from my perspective at least, it's not just about that. But what I loved about the film was the choice that you made, Peter, to not choose victimhood. You chose rebellion and resistance.
Yeah, that was what caught my attention in the first instance, to be honest. Because, as I said, Nadine, I was going to make a documentary of a group of Black people in a sector of Jamaica who held on to their African ancestry. That was the pitch. And I was going to go there as a Yoruba person and greet them like, Boruboyo, and see whether they answer me back. And then we start having this chin wag about, so what does this mean to you? In my place in Abeokuta, this is what it means. That was the plan. But the more I read, in order to prepare myself for this documentary, the more excited I got about how these guys were just incredible and, deployed camouflage and guerrilla warfare. And I'm like, oh my God, this is incredible, And when I didn't get any plus in terms of people commissioning this documentary, I thought, I think we need to make a film. At the end of the day, it's storytelling. It's still documentary making. It's still storytelling, whether I make it as a documentary or as a feature film. The mission that I had initially is to put these words out there. Like, have you heard about these people? And I've watched a lot of films as well, made by Hollywood, that's, refer to communities that people didn't know. Like, the the conflict in Myanmar. I've seen Sylvester Stallone make films about places where they feel like there's injustice happening and they want to highlight it to the world. So whether it's a feature film or a documentary or an article on CNN, we're still telling stories, creating awareness, informing the audience, educating them, and maybe in this case, providing some entertainment. And just to get that conversation going, really.
And why do you think it's so important for African audiences? And I mean that Africa on the continent. So Nigeria is a massive market, Ghana, South Africa. Why do you think this particular story is so important to African countries?
To bridge that gap, there's such that divide between Africa and the Caribbean, it needs to be bridged. Recently, they had the Unity Cup in London. Even though it was all banter, but my goodness, the conversation in between the banter. So for me, I'm thinking, when are we going to close this gap once and for all so we can all thrive together? And I feel like the creative sector offers an incredible opportunity for us as a community. So that's why it was important for me. I wanted the gap bridged because every time when I see like Jamaican pop culture, it's always like something that I've witnessed before. I remember having a friend when I first came to the UK. We worked together as security guards, and he brought some food and he wanted to share it. It was my first time eating like outside of my home. So he's mixed heritage, and he kept saying, "Oh, I brought some Jamaican food for you. You're gonna love Jamaican food, rice and dodo." And I'm like, "Huh? This is rice and beans and plantain. What are you on about? This is my food." But every sentence, it was like, "I brought some Jamaican food for you," right? Jamaican food, yes, but that's what I ate before I got on the plane to get here. Do you see what I mean? So I just realized there's so much in common that I feel like, can we start to celebrate this? And so for me as a filmmaker and as a storyteller or as a journalist, I just feel like, why? Let's just be the one to drive the agenda. Let's set the agenda. If they want to set agendas of conflicts, of you are not us, we are not you, we are not linked, I want to set the agenda of we are linked, we are one, we are together. Whatever's happened has happened. Now we are going to be together and go into the future.
And Nadine, just to tie up what you said about the pattern that you detected between African directors with Yardi and
Jamaican.
So I was told a few years ago that my mentor, Menelik Shabazz, was supposed to have directed Yardi. But the people that had the money thought that Menelik was not, quote, bankable enough for that film to appeal to global audiences. And so they went with Idris Elba. Now, obviously, it's a matter of conjecture whether Yardi was a success or what. How do you measure success in terms of Yardi, in terms of the cast that were...
Come on, Emmanuel. Come on. Stop that.
I'm just saying.
Stop that. In terms of conjecture, come on.
I'm just saying. But like you said, you made a very important point about that pattern. And I know Freddie very well in terms of Jamaican, and I know that he has received a lot of heat. And obviously he's been trying to justify why him. And I know he's tried to engage with the Jamaican High Commission and various dignitaries to kind of co-sign the fact that he, who is not Jamaican, has put this story out there. It's a very messy area. And like you said, care is so important in matters of creative discourse, especially when you're literally putting a culture out there, like anything and everything, whether it's on the poster, whether it's on the title, whether it's in the casting. I'm still recovering from the whole Ali G discourse. I mean, we've been having these periodic discussions about cultural appropriation. And I guess that's for another day. But I wanted to mention Menelik because Menelik taught me so much about this industry. And obviously, without his guidance, I would not be in this position to talk to you. Another person of Caribbean descent, Francis Anne Solomon, who's got a prolific track record in film and television. These are two people who I've learned from about how to take care about what you're putting out there, especially for our people. So I would always take counsel with regards to feedback. And obviously Peter has already started doing that research. Since Cannes, I've been to various networking events, playing the trailers, speaking to Jamaicans and just other Black people. And when they see the title Maroons, without fail, everyone's got a relative of Maroon heritage. Everyone's got a story. So that just says to us that when this film is released nationally, internationally, that there's going to be such an outpouring of people with a shared kind of experience and just kind of a shared knowledge and a shared appreciation that this story has been put out there. And I think that's something that we should all look forward to. But we should continue to have these conversations because it's only going to help.
It's a blind spot.
Yes, it is a huge blind spot.
And also, Nadine, I just thought about the fact that imagine all these years of filmmaking, but nobody ever thought that the Maroons were worth like 5 minutes of their storytelling, whether it was in Roots or Django, whatever it is that they've made, that something as dramatic as that, that a bunch of slaves escaped, ran off, and then the infantry went to look for them and got absolutely obliterated by leaves and shrubs, that anybody didn't think that was interesting enough to tell. I'm just shocked, like there wasn't anything. And I'm like, really? Nothing, none of this is one of those that really propelled me, like, because I was just going to do a regular slave story from the mouth of the Africans. And I just realized, we really need to lean on this Maroon storytelling. Somebody needs to know that at a time in history, Black people did this kind of stuff, which was incredible, to the point that the oppressors had to say, all right, now let's sit together and have a chat and call it truce.
No, I mean, I think it's wonderful. I wouldn't say that everybody has a Maroon relative because they're isolated on specific parts of the island. But the culture is very different. The language is different. Often the food eating is very different. The religious practices are very different. They often rely more on what you would call was indigenous African spirituality. But I have a few questions about the film. And Emmanuel, you said that your wife was blown away by it. What do you think she particularly enjoyed about the film?
I think those issues of resilience and just kind of the fact that these people were fighting against a mighty oppressor. And it's the way that Peter told the film. It was such on a grand scale, even with the nominal resources that Peter had at his disposal. It looks very comfortable with the big budget epics that you'd see week in, week out. So I think as a director herself, I think that's what she appreciated first and foremost. And then those issues of resilience, but just the lack of awareness about this story and this struggle. I think that's what humbled her and appreciated the story and the storytelling even more. But also the timing, as with anything, timing is so important in these kind of discussions. Like I said, we've just had Sinners where seemingly every Black person has seen it. And if they haven't, it's like they've missed out on this kind of moment in time. And I think what we're trying to do with IREKE was trying to almost recreate that kind of sense of belonging, the sense that if you don't catch this film, you're going to miss out on a very important discussion and a point of discourse with the goal of bringing people together rather than keeping people in their different silos and allowing the likes of a Chafakan to enter the discourse where there is more negatives being spoken about than positives. But we can't fight every battle, I guess is kind of fundamentally what I'm getting at. But like I said, timing is everything. And what Claire really appreciated about the film was the fact that it was told by a journalist, which is very important as well. When Claire made her first film, she had made the feature film before, but the story she told came from her lived experience of being a dermatologist. And as a dark-skinned woman, a lot of her clients who looked like her wanted Claire to develop skin bleaching creams. And at that time, skin bleaching still is big business. And on ethical grounds, she decided to pack up her highly successful business in Harley Street, which had won awards. She was honored by the Queen for it. And she turned that kind of fuel into her first feature film. And so there are many similarities with what Claire had gone through in her first film, with what Peter was going through now in terms of authorship and just kind of having that inspirational moment to then not just tell a documentary, but actually just make a feature film. So I think there was just so much about it that appealed to her greatly. And obviously, as a husband, I had no choice but to kind of buy into it.
You had a choice. Well done. So I'll applaud you. It's very important for husbands to support their wives. Well done, Emmanuel. What I liked about the film and what I was surprised about, because with most, my experience, Black male filmmakers, they shy away from sexual violence. And they shy away from the sexual violence of women that might look like their mums or their sisters. And there was so much rape, right? But it was done in a way where you knew it was brutal, but I didn't have to fast forward or switch off. And that sexual exploitation I hadn't seen before. And it was savage. And the way in which you made it what it was, but it wasn't porno-like. It wasn't salacious. There was no way you could look at that and think, that feels and sound like there was no. It was what it was. It was savage, and as a woman, I really appreciated not just that you told the story of the rampant sexual abuse, but the way in which you told it. It wasn't enough for me to turn away, but it was enough for me to know exactly what it was.
It was. Thank you so much for that. Even when we're trying to execute that, it was very tricky. But the fact that I live in England, having all the trainings of, safeguarding, etc., because some of these women are very young and they were desperate to get into this film, especially when they heard the producer was from London and all of that. So a lot of them were willing to do whatever it took. However, I had somebody on ground that I said, keep checking. Let them realize, even if they're not comfortable, they will still have the path. They still have the path and they'll still get paid. They don't have to go crazy. If they don't feel comfortable, let us know. So the lady that was supposed to be the house help to the master, she'd said yes to a lot of things in the script. But in the moment with cameraman, lightman, boom mic, she had some jitters. And then she said, I don't feel comfortable to take my clothes off. And I'm like, that's okay. But how far, if we were to raise your dress up, how far are you willing to go? Knee, thigh? She said, I can get to thigh level. I said, are you happy at thigh level? She said, I'm happy at thigh level. And then we just rearranged the cameras to make sure that she didn't feel vulnerable or left a bad taste in her mouth when it was all said and done, just to make sure that people's dignity were preserved. And so for me as well, to come into Nollywood, to come into the Nigerian film industry, to be able to at least bring some ethics or etiquette into it for safeguarding, I was really pleased that when I watched it, even though it wasn't what I had in my paper, I was still happy that at least we know this was a rape that's just happened. And we know this is abuse of power here, even though she didn't say a word, but it's not like she can. So I think we're okay. So I'm happy that you made that observation, because it was one of them where you think, I wish they could really execute as I wrote it. And then at the same time, you think, is that not too much? But because I kept reading about everything that happened, I would read in graphics, how they treated the slaves and etc. And I'd be like, oh gosh, I wish I can actually recreate it as I've read it. But yeah, we did the best that we could, especially with the resources, because money was such a big challenge.
I mean, hopefully the censors will see it the same way, because we still got the film through the BBFC, who might ask us to separate it down a little bit. We're not sure yet, but I'm just putting
I hope not, because it wasn't savage. It was savage, but it wasn't savage. And I'm quite sensitized to these things. So I really hope that they don't change that. Also, the way in which you use nakedness, right? And so when I watch films, I don't like gratuitous violence or ridiculous over-sexualized scenes. And there were a couple of scenes where the women were in the shower and the chief had come out and said, keep yourself clean. If you don't clean yourself, I'll slap you. And it was just like, the nakedness was acceptable to me, because they were meat. They were being sold, just like when you meet in a bookshop shop or you decorate your cakes and you put them in the window. They were not humans. They were not people anymore. They were commerce. They were objects. And I thought that was a really clever way to use the nakedness of Black women, because the women were voluptuous, beautiful bodies, but you couldn't even focus on that because you're just like, oh my God, God knows what's going to happen to them now.
I'm so
Oh
happy you mentioned. And even again, back to execution, we briefed the team. We are shooting once. These women will not be exposing themselves forever. So we make this shot once. And then we spoke to the chief guy. You're going to block them with your big outfit so that we see them once and that's it. You know, henceforth, we will not be able to see them glaringly, but we are making this shot just once. And then, you know, we had behind the scene people taking pictures. At that point, we said, no behind the scene, everybody move away. We shoot this scene just once, you know, but the ladies, they were happy to at least have a scene because most of them were supposed to be just extras. And then we you know, the female producer said, we do need people to have a wash. We're willing to renegotiate. If you're willing, we need just 2 or 3. Then we had somebody said, I'll do it. You know, as long as the camera is far back. We said, don't worry, the camera is going to be far, 3 seconds, and we're going to cover you up. And on cut, they got dressed, left the scene. So, you know, all these things were playing in our mind as to, can we tell this story properly? These things actually happened. But at the same time, how do we make sure that we safeguard, that people are not...
The thing that threw me, like, seriously, so the love scene between, I don't know, the overseer, I don't know what we would call him, with the other girl saying, oh, would you like to come back to Birmingham? Would you go? And I'm saying, but wait, you're really going to sell out the whole of your people then and run off with, are you mad? So that woman, I was just like, someone needs to poison you because you're mashing up the whole thing. And then when I think they set him on fire, and the other lady was saying, bring the fire. And then she was screaming. I was like, somebody shut her up. Wow. Like, so you were still able to raise the tension. And I was like, man, Peter's just trying to make me get upset.
That's the whole point. Yeah.
I mean, what I learned from the academy is film has to be emotions. Get people angry or get them upset, but they have to be emotions. They can't just watch your film and be like, nah. So it was a case of...
I was like, he ain't taking you to England.
She needs a visa.
So
thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
No. There were some parts that I really had me, that they held me. And I think the opening, so I'm going to ask you why you chose one of these opening shots where the chef comes and he not only spits in the food, he snorts and spits in what I'd imagine was porridge, right? Yeah. And then I was just like, even myself, I was like, did they do that? And she's not going to tell on him. Oh my God, I hope he doesn't die. I hope he... So even from the beginning, I was just like, oh my, like, this isn't even real. So why did you start with that? Why? Because that set the tone of the film.
I would love to attribute that to the help that I got from the production team. So I had people that were more experienced than me, and they just started giving me multiple advice as to where we should start the film from. Because initially I was going to start from the chaos where the Maroons had already turned up and sacked the entire place, then go back in time where it started. And they were saying to me, no, don't do that. You know, just start generically and keep going. And we had an option of a lot of nasty things that we thought we should do. So the big guy, Mofe, and these are all Nollywood top actors, by the way. So we paid, all the budget went to them because I paid all of them to get them. And we were playing with options. I said, can you put the spatula in your pants and then mix it? And they just, I then realized at some point they were judging me. I realized that every suggestion I gave, they look at me like I was some vile human being, you know. So I thought, oh God, these people are going to judge me. So I just kept quiet. But you know, because I knew that one of the things the slaves did was that spat into food, put stuff in it to get them having running tummy. So I thought, let's just find some nasty things that we can do. And Ivo said, let me just spit into it. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, just do and spit.
So from the beginning, my heart was in my chest. I was like, I saw them bad. Oh my God. Like, so I did enjoy that bit. And I wanted to ask, at the end, when the mistress of the house, it looks like she's pounding yam. And it sounded like what I would call spoken word poetry, the land where they used to own us and now we walk on it free.
Yeah.
What was the symbolism of the mistress of the house pounding yam?
Nothing really. It's like payback time. So it's like you've used us as slaves, now it's your turn. So again, some of the challenges of the low budget movie. There was supposed to be a handful of captured slavers now being made to do the work. You know, again, because it's fiction, I'm not exactly recreating a factual based story. So the story is fiction inspired by true account. So when I realized very early on that it's going to be tough to tell the story fully from the factual standpoint, I made the decision very quickly. This is a work of fiction, but what's inspired it is actual account of the exploits of Jamaican Maroons, the sacking of the Benin Empire, like when the white guys came into that Nollywood and started shooting everyone. That was from the Benin Empire of when they came and took all their artifacts. So I had about 2 or 3 things that inspired me to write the IREKE story, And so in that case, I was just like, how about we then let them capture everybody and make them do the work? But all the guys, the kind of money they were asking for, it was just so hard that we really couldn't do much anymore. And was just like, let's just see it over the line. She's here. She's willing to do it. Let her do it. And that was it, really.
So would you have spared her, Nadine?
I was going to marry her off to somebody.
You're going to marry her off? Oh, right.
Okay, so this is there's so much stuff, right? So this is another question I had as well. So no, I wouldn't have spared them, but I don't understand. I still felt, right, because when you read the accounts in Jamaica of slave rebellions, right, where I come from, is the biggest slave rebellion in Jamaica that destabilized the British Empire. They had to send boats from England, and that was the Tacky. They called it the Easter Rebellion, the Tacky Rebellion. And when they went through about 7 or 8 plantations and basically killed, because some of the enslaved Africans fought with the rebels, and others fought to protect the slave masters, right? And so basically they killed everyone that was protecting the slave master and the slave masters. But I was wondering why you didn't use violence, right? Because the same violence, the man that chopped his head off, I was like, backside, they're chopping off heads as well. And then the other one who had his belly cut open and you saw his intestines. And then I was like, why wasn't this woman beaten? Because she made the preacher's daughter be burnt alive for being a witch, and she wasn't even a witch. And then I was like, she's more, in many ways, she's more wicked than the man, or they're both as wicked. But she didn't experience violence. That's the sequel.
Sequel. But also I wanted to also send a message as to what Atonda said, there's too much deaths already. I just wanted to show how magnanimous we can be, even after all we've been through. When I think about Nelson Mandela, like the first thing, people are still calling him to tomorrow, even in his grave, to be like, why would you do that? After suffering for so long, the first thing you want to do is reconcile with those that hurt you. And I'm just thinking it says a lot about us, where even though we've been mistreated, when we have the power, we offer the olive branch. I just wanted a bit of that. But to be honest with you, I'm easy. I could go either way. But this is where the sequel opens a big door of opportunity, because that prince has to go back home to confront the uncle that sold him off. There's still a lot of unfinished business. The chief that sold everybody out, the big muscly guy, is still coming back to find him. So there's still a lot to do in the sequel, and hopefully we can gain the right momentum and then have all the right collaboration with our cousins on the island and do it together. That would be my desire, to be honest.
Is there anything you guys would like to say before we end our wonderful discussion?
Caribbean, let's do this. Jamaica, let's do this.
July the 25th, that's the date. Go and tell your friends to tell a friend to tell a friend. Very important film, a very important time in the film industry. So it's great that we're having this platform to kind of share kind of our experiences of how we've all come together
Absolutely.
to kind of celebrate the work of Peter. And obviously the work of the Windrush Caribbean Film Festival. It's very important that these platforms exist, because without them, we don't have these conversations. So we're all doing our bit. Long may it continue.
Amen.
Thank you so much. And I wish you all the best with the film. It
Thanks,
was a
Nadine.
wonderful viewing experience, and you really highlighted a story that should have far more global prominence. So thank you.
Thank you.